Welcome back to the Conservation Conversation. This is episode 9. This is going to be an amazing one. We are going to be talking about Florida's red tide. And Florida's red tide breaks down into a couple different parts of a topic. One has to do with nature itself, but the other has to do with how our pollution is affecting the world around us, and also how the politics are allowing that to happen. Whether you live in Florida or you're going to be visiting Florida, this is going to be an amazing episode. We have some of the best activists from Florida that are going to be joining us. So I'm excited. Hey, Andrea, welcome from Romania. Welcome back to Conservation Conversation, episode 9. All right, here we are. Hey, it's good to see everybody. And I hope everybody's Sunday is going really well. Sunday fun day. Hey, Rhonda. Fantastic. Yeah, today we have an amazing show. We have Colleen Marie, who's been on our show before, and she's actually going out in the field right now to take us to where the red tide has been reported to have been seen, give us some updates on what's happening, answer some questions about what's going on out there, and bring it all together. And then we have Kenny Hinkle Jr., who is one of the big activists down in Florida. He has started Bull Sugar, called out Big Sugar, called out a bunch of other groups, and he now works in the River Coalition, and he's going to join us to talk to us about how everything really works down there. Hey, Sierra, glad you could join us today. Nice to see you on here. This is excellent. We're getting a bunch of great Florida activists showing up. And Coralie, hey, Coralie, always glad you're here to join us. It's always nice to see your name pop up there. And Stell, hey Stell. By the way, as we talk today, we're going to be talking about how the pollution affects the water systems, and that affects the health of everybody. I recommend, and we will put this link down there as well, but Stell runs an amazing organization called Fight for Zero, and that's fight, the number 4, zero.org. Go to that website. It is an amazing resource that will keep you updated on all the things that are happening with the water. And hey, Bruce, good to see you. And you know, that's the thing, is that Florida water is very complicated. But today what I'd like to do is start off with a quote. And I think this quote is, most people from Florida will be able to recognize, I think, this quote. And here we go. And this is Marjorie Stoneman Douglas said, "Be a nuisance where it counts. Do your part to inform and stimulate the public to join your action. Be depressed, discouraged, and disappointed at failure and the disheartening effects of ignorance, greed, corruption, and bad politics. But never give up." And that exactly sums up what I think a lot of people that are here on there. Oh, thank you, Stell, for putting that the link up. I'm telling you guys, fightforzero.org is an amazing resource. So in the and again, that quote I think just goes perfect for who our guests are today, because they have both really put become, as they say, a fly in the ointment to business as usual in Florida. So I think business as usual is somewhat the problem that we have down there. So Florida, like I said, Florida has a lot of things going on. Now, just recently, they had come up with the fact that there was red tide that's been spotted back again. So real fast, the technical definition, according to NOAA, is that red tide is a common term for a harmful algae bloom. Now, these blooms occur when colonies of algae, simple plants that live in the sea and freshwater, grow out of control while producing toxic or harmful effects on people. Think about that for a second. These things grow out of control while producing toxic or harmful effects on people, fish, shellfish, marine mammals, and birds. Now, they say the human illnesses caused by HABs can be rare, but they admit that they can be debilitating or even fatal. Now, I think we are going to talk to some people today that may have to contradict their idea that these cases may be rare. These cases, I think, are actually a little bit more common than they would like to report. And this is the problem. You have a system, and the system allows these companies to put everything into the water. So what we're talking about here is Florida's not very wide, and Florida has a couple different enemies to the environment and to nature. And one of the biggest problems they have is that this idea of best management practices, that all the companies will do what's best for their surrounding area. It's good in theory, but what we see is big agriculture, big sugar. We see phosphate mining. We see a lot of industry. Fertilizer alone, phosphorus feeds red tide, feeds algae blooms. There's a lot that they're all dumping into the rivers, and they're allowed by permits, all these companies, to dump into the rivers, into the lakes, and to a couple other areas. So this is, and I just wanted to kind of give everybody a brief idea. If you're like me, you have more questions than answers about red tide for sure, and all the algae blooms, the blue-green algae, and our guests today, they still have a lot of questions, but they do have a lot of answers for us. Now, where red tide is, I think, very fascinating is it's the one time where the entire nation can see that we have affected our environment without question. And, they try to keep the question mark in for climate debate, but here we see it. This is it. This is our pollution. These are our choices that are affecting our environment directly. Now, Florida is an amazing case because they are under attack from several different polluters, several different forms of nutrients that are being thrown out into the water that are killing everything. But with this amazing fight that Florida has, it's also the biggest hope spot because there is an equal amount of passionate activists that have stood up and said, we need to bring attention to this. We need to stop this. And the only way we can do this is by letting everybody see what's happening, because for too long it's been held behind a curtain and hidden. So this has been a major issue. And people like our next guest, Colleen, have gone out and shown everybody what's happening out there. So one thing I want to do real fast before we get there is I just wanted to show everybody that these are the riverways all throughout Florida. Now, they're all connected because they all eventually, the flatlands will flood and the water will mix around. So the water itself has been designed to naturally filter and go through this entire state. So if it drops into one river, it's going to go into a bunch of rivers, then it's going to end up in the Gulf or the Atlantic, and it's going to feed some of the other issues that we have. Now, these are the above ground rivers. I also wanted to mention the aquifers, because the aquifer is so massive that it takes water from everywhere. Now, these are massive underground water systems, and you have to remember Florida's made of limestone. So it can go through, whatever's on the surface, if it sinks through into the aquifer or even into the limestone, into the ground, it can eventually work its way down into the aquifer, just like when Mosaic dumped the millions and millions of acres, millions and millions of gallons of radioactive water into the aquifer, and then the story just sort of disappeared. Nobody really talked about it after that. So I wanted to just kind of bring that up. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is that red tide, although is natural, it's not naturally occurring as we know it these days. So this is an important thing. And this is Andy Melee, who has been fighting for clean water for quite a while out there. And these are two sets of data. Basically, the one in the blue is from the 60s and the one in the red is from modern times. And you can see the differences in how the nutrient loads and how we've treated our water around us is affecting the water quality and is affecting the reports. So I wanted to bring that up. So welcome to Florida, the algae state. And like I said, we are going to talk to Colleen here in just 1 minute. But I also wanted to show everybody the change in red tide in how long it's been occurring. People a lot of times will say it's naturally occurring, but check that out. Now, you got to remember, red tide was spotted in the 16th century for the very first time. So it is a documented natural thing. But as we allow more nutrients and more pollutants to come in from the mining sector, from big ag and big sugar and other fertilizer, lawns fertilizers, all of this is extending the length of time that it's taking for nature to correct itself. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up with everybody. I think it's a very important thing. And one thing I'd like to do now too is show you. This here is, let's see, okay. There we go. So this is the change in months and how long it's been going on. And now a lot of the activists down there know that this has to do with, this really has a lot to do with what we're putting in our water. And again, this is big sugar, big ag. This is cattle industry. This is mining, phosphate mining, and the dumping into the river. And all of this is not only making nature sick, it's making people sick. And this is our connection. We can never forget that we are part of nature. So I now wanted to bring your attention over to an amazing shot from our next guest, from Colleen. And this is some of the fish kills that were recent that she got. And this actually is the photo that I really wanted to share, because this photo brought Colleen national attention, and she was able to actually bring her cause, which is the killing of all these mammals and fish and sea turtles according to the red tide and from the red tide, and people were not talking about it. So she jumped over the boundaries by putting this in. So this is Colleen here in her normal gear. And what I'm going to do now is go ahead and show everybody a video. She's been out on the beaches showing us what's happening, and I'm going to get her live on the show and right back with Colleen.
Well, good morning, Naples. I am back at it. Here we go. Toxic Tide Tour 2019, at it again. Unfortunately, we have red tide in Naples, and today is looking a little bit better than it has in the last couple days. However, there's still a pretty active fish kill happening on the beaches here. I'm on Naples Beach, just south of the pier. And let me show you kind of what we have. Unfortunately, I didn't beat the cleaning. They came through and cleaned a lot more than I was hoped before I got here. So, but here we go. So there are some mullet on the beach, definitely not as many as there were this week. So far, I've already walked like a half mile down that way, and maybe only a dozen or so on the beach, but they definitely have come through and cleaned up what has washed up since last night. Hi. I am at Naples Beach, just south of the Naples Pier right now. I got here about 45 minutes ago to check out what the red tide situation looks like here, because it returned this about a week ago. And we are experiencing a minor fish kill. There's a lot of dead fish at the bottom floating in. And the air has a little bit of a peppery scent to it, which are the toxins that cause respiratory irritants and things like that. So I do have a mask with me just in case, but right now I'm doing okay. So
okay, good. Yeah, I've heard. I mean, that's one thing that I was interested in talking about is, we see the dolphins, we see the fish, and it brings it back into everybody's mind. But then there's all this time where people aren't thinking about the red tide, and there are still harmful things in the air. Could you kind of talk a little bit about, so people can understand some of the unseen dangers that happen when we're not thinking about what's going on out there?
Yeah, well, basically, you have to think is the water could be clear during a red tide event because the bulk of the bloom may not be directly on shore right now. But aerosols from the toxins do get picked up into the air, and they can come ashore when the wind turns a specific direction. And it can cause like irritation, to your lungs, to your nose, to your eyes. You can cough. If you have COPD, if you have asthma, if you have any type of immune compromised issue that affects your respiratory system, you should not be within a mile or more. I mean, they say it even can carry up to 10 miles or more inland. But you should not be in this air because it can really cause a lot of irritation, and it can cause asthma attacks and things like that. And it's just not worth risking your health when you're around this. But so many people see that the water's clear, and you should see it right now. There are a ton of people at the beach, and most of them are in the water and below the surface next to their feet. And I just posted pictures on my page. Is dead fish everywhere. Wow. The beach patrol's coming through and picking up the fish as quickly as they're washing up onto the beach right now. So it's it's definitely concerning because people don't take it as seriously with the health effects because they're told, well, it's a naturally occurring bloom, which it is, but it can still cause potential health effects, and it is becoming exacerbated over time because of the man-made pollution. A lot of studies are now suggesting that, and they're doing a lot of studies looking further into that now.
So, now when you go down there, um, and you see the fact that people aren't being warned, can you kind of let us know that those of us that aren't in Florida are surprised because we would imagine there'd be signs everywhere and it would sort of, we would be able to be basically informed consumers and know what's happening and do we want to go in that water or not. But it sounds like the tourism is somewhat in conflict with the idea of transparency.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because last year, during the height of the algae crisis that we were facing, the red tide actually got picked up in the Gulf Loop or the Gulf Stream, and it was taken up around the Keys and up the east coast of Florida. When it hit specific beaches in the east coast of Florida, the first person that coughed, those beaches were shut down. All the lifeguards, everybody was given protective gear to wear and respirators to wear and things like that. Whereas here in this coast, we're open for business. We basically have these simple signs that are flip down signs at each beach entrance that just says red tide is present. It's naturally occurring is the very first thing on the sign, and it can cause respiratory illness and things like that. But it doesn't go into the potential that when you're swimming in it, if you swallow it, you can end up with some serious gastrointestinal issues and have a really upset stomach for the remainder of the day. And they don't bring things up with that. Shellfish is another issue. You should not be consuming shellfish when you are when a red tide bloom is active. Make sure it's not being sourced from these waters. It is pretty regulated though, so I wouldn't worry much if you're going to a restaurant and stuff like that. Yeah, here they don't really warn you. We get the same rhetoric as normal, which is it's just naturally occurring, therefore it's normal, and then there's nothing to worry about. But I hate to compare like apples to oranges, but you look at situations like cancer. Cancer is naturally occurring, but when we're adding more pathogens to it, it can create more worse things. And it's kind of a similar scenario where we're adding things to this to make these blooms a lot more exacerbated, a lot more frequent, and we're not taking the health effects seriously enough. The Department of Healthy Beaches here in Florida, or the Department of Health, their Healthy Beaches program here in Florida, they come through and they test the water, and there's specific beaches that they test, and they will put all clear, this beach is healthy sign. Last year, I'm traveling along these beaches because I was traveling between here in, actually down in Marco Island, here in Naples, all the way up to Siesta Key. I was going to these beaches and they would have healthy beaches signs. This beach is healthy. This beach is normal. However, there's a red tide bloom happening. There's dead fish everywhere. People are swimming surrounded by dead fish. They're coughing, they're sneezing, and they're showing all these symptoms. But so it's very misleading here how it goes about it. And I mean, it is enter at your own risk in this scenario. But, you would think that they would take the time to educate people more about the health effects with red tide and associated red tide. And unfortunately, we don't know enough about the long-term health effects at all with what's going to happen. There's not enough studies out there yet.
So it sounds like, it's starting to get worse and worse as well. And you guys are starting to see worse and worse, problems with health. I mean, one of the big things I think last year was the picture we put up with the dolphin. When we started to understand that mammals were getting brain issues and neurotoxins, I think it was finally a way for people to understand that what happens to them is what's happening to us. We are the same. We have the same, I think, susceptibilities, and I think that really brought it home, and a lot of people, were really hit by that. Now, as far as things are going down there. What would be your number one advice for people that are visiting Florida, but number two for people that live there that need to figure out how to proceed with caution?
Well, I mean, the best thing you can do is educate yourself. There is a lot of information out on the internet about red tide and a lot of good studies out there. Get involved. There are informational events and meetings that are happening all over the place. Calusa Waterkeeper is a great source of information. FGCU down here has been a wealth of information in regard to red tide research. We also have Moat Marine doing a lot of research on health effects and sources of pollution and nutrients that are feeding it. And the biggest researcher out there is NOAA. NOAA has huge programs going on right now researching. I actually know people right now who are out on research vessels in the Northern Gulf, and they're primarily looking at red tide right now. Education is key, and that's it's up to us to educate ourselves. I was so ignorant about red tide until I moved here to Florida and started noticing them more and more. I've been visiting here for 20 years and I've seen them happen, but I never thought anything of it because I've always heard it's naturally occurring. But once I started realizing, okay, this isn't normal what we're seeing, especially last year with the amount of dolphins and turtles and whales and I mean everything, manatees, everything was dying from it. And so I started researching, I started learning more about it and what we know. And it's true that there's a lot of research out there, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions and we need to do a lot about it. And a big reason why there's such limited research is because Karenia brevis, which is the dinoflagellate that red tide comes from, is specific to the Gulf. So it's not like it's blooming everywhere else in the world with this particular Karenia species. There's other ones that bloom around the world too. But this is specific to the Gulf. So there's a lot of research that has to be specified to the Gulf.
Now, I know that there's been a lot of talk about, a new administration, and they're trying to look at blue-green algae, putting together task forces and things. Do you think that these task forces are steps in the right direction, or do you think that there are more factors that are not being looked at that they're still going to need to bring in order to really, really resolve this?
We had task force kind of like this set up, established at one time before. So I think it is beneficial that we do have them here. They will help bring a lot more information and do a lot of research. Do politics get in the middle of things? Absolutely. With any of this stuff, it's Florida. It's quite obvious that politics kind of rule when it comes to a lot of our environmental issues that we're facing down here. And so because it does open a lot more resources and information and more research. However, I think that we're not doing enough in regard to actually addressing pollution. We know where we're polluting. We know what we're putting into the water. We know we're all guilty of it, but nothing's being done to regulate to enforce what regulations are on the books, and not enough is being done to add more regulations. Everyone is so scared in the state of Florida of the word regulation, but we've gone and deregulated all the wrong things, and now we are actually seeing the fallout from that.
So, so now that brings me naturally to my next question, which is, I think, like I said, in Florida, it's a hope spot because there's so much happening and you guys are under attack with so many different industries. For one, like we were talking about, the phosphate discharge that feeds the blooms. We're talking about big ag, big sugar, and we're gonna have Kenny on to talk about that as well. What can people do? Forget about the sides. I know that it's very divided down there, and politics are very important. One of my favorite things that I saw when I first started learning about Florida and the water issues was the vote water concept. So, what are ways that maybe people can find to make sure that their interest of a cleaner future can be addressed? As we're entering this new political system, new political time, it's actually I think, a good time to make sure that the environment stays in the forefront.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is something that everyone should be taking as seriously as we do look at jobs and healthcare and the economy, because especially here in Florida, because our environment is what is our main driver of our economy down here. And so we need a healthy environment to keep our tourism going. And so I totally just spaced what was your question. Sorry,
That's okay.
In my throat.
It happens to me all the time. What I'm saying is, what is a way that we can... Oh, hey, Paula. Paula's on with us. Paula's another amazing clean water activist down in Florida. And Paula has been in a big fight, in a big part of the effort to fight the phosphate mining down there, which again discharges into the rivers. And as we saw earlier, all the rivers connect to all the waters. My question was, what do you think those people that are down there that want to get involved, as the elections are coming in? Yeah, what ways can people get involved locally to try to make changes, maybe statewide or even larger?
There are a lot of initiatives right now happening. I would look into the conservation voters of Florida. I would look into different organizations that what they're doing law-wise. Captains for Clean Water does a lot of litigation work and things like that. They're a group to look into. There are the rights of nature organizations right now establishing here in Florida, where we are fighting for the rights for nature to have its own rights, and so it can't be used and abused like it is. That's a good organization. If you are an independent or a Democrat, there is the Democratic Environmental Caucus, which has recently been set up here in Florida. And, it's talking about just environmental solutions. There are a lot of organizations. I suggest, look on Facebook and look around, ask in the various water groups about what groups are out there. Vote Water is a good one to follow. The South Florida Clean Water Movement is a good one to follow. They have a lot of resource information as to different events and things that are happening that can help educate you and help educate the public, and also just a wealth of information and knowledge. But I mean, really, at the end of the day, education is key. And so you need to educate yourself to see what you want to see change, and then start to look into all these different options, because there are a lot down here. It's just a matter of finding those resources and getting out and doing things. And it doesn't hurt to show up to your county commissioner meetings, and during public inquiry, start asking questions about these things, and things like that, and get more civically involved, and you'll start to find more localized organizations as well.
And yeah, I love that approach too, because it's sort of like we had talked about before. Instead of viewing the environment through the political parties, we need to view every politician through the lens of the environment and see how they hold up to what we really want out of the future. Politics is almost redefining itself to our needs in a way that's so organic. It's a really interesting time to be in. And in Florida especially, you guys have really brought a lot of attention to it. Again, I think Florida is such an important thing because it's happening. People are being sold out to their industries in every state out there, but a lot of people are still unaware. And Florida has done an amazing job of bringing that to the attention. And like I said, you were able to bring images and bring the story out to national attention, which I think made a big difference as well. And I just want to bring up, Rhonda says, all politicians, both parties, tell us what we want to hear to get voted in.
No disagreement there.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And that's why we need more civic engagement. That's why we need to start showing up to things. We need to stop, just hiding behind our computer screens and our keyboards, and actually show up and get more involved when and where you can.
Great. Well, perfectly said. Now, Jeffrey, let's see, Fackenthal says, I think the FWC needs reorganization of its priorities. Can you help us understand the FWC and sort of how they tie into everything that we're talking about?
Well, FWC is very much in charge of checking our water quality here in Florida. They do all of our water testing and everything like that. So they're the ones who are out here regulating a lot of things and bringing to us what is going on with our waterways and doing testing. We used to have so many more test sites. And then unfortunately, our previous governor removed a lot of funds from FWC. So they don't have the resources like they used to be able to go out and research and do things. Also, they were gagged for the longest time where they couldn't even discuss something as simple as climate change. So, you have an issue where the politics did get into the FWC and really kind of limited them on a lot of things that they could do. They're trying hard. Trust me, I speak to people from the FWC all the time, and I know we all give them a hard time because there's aspects of things that they do in one end that is terrible, like the spraying. The way they are out of control with spraying our waterways with herbicides. But at the same time, there's a lot of good that they do with the research and the things that they're doing to try to bring us information and try to work with the health of the beaches and try to do things within their power to try. I mean, they do try, and that's why I don't want to discredit them too much. A lot of it is just the lack of resources for them to do their jobs.
And that's a very international problem. Everywhere I traveled, I always like to tell the story when I showed up in the Philippines. I went out. Our job was to go, patrol these marine protected areas because the Coast Guard only had one boat, and that boat had a hole, and that boat was in the yard next to the front door. being repaired. And so they hadn't been in the water for, I think, about 6 or 7 months. And this is the
Jeez.
Coast Guard.
Wow.
And so, we find that a lot of times politicians will make laws that will make them popular, or they'll do things or events that'll make them popular, but then strangle the budgets so that the enforcement aspect still allows a loophole so that the companies can live within these loopholes without too much enforcement or too many issues. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah. And but what's
Those
great is you
special
guys have
interests
said
always come into play.
no more.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there.
No,
But
no.
it's amazing, and I think that you guys bring a level of awareness every day, which brings me to what you do. And what you do, I think, is very unique. You go down, and I mean, what I'd like to talk about a little bit is, why did you start walking down the beaches? And what's the most powerful moment that you've had, or how has this changed you inside?
Um, it's changed me in the fact that I have lost a lot of faith in humanity, seeing what I've seen, and just experiencing the amount of denial from a lot of people that live down here. But at the same time, a lot of that faith has been restored because I'm seeing so many more people at the same time stepping up and taking action as well.
Yeah.
I started doing this last summer, going out to the beaches every day to document what was happening. Because honestly, I'm an avid kayaker and I couldn't be out in the water. I'm seeing everything around me die. I'm seeing the dolphins die. I'm seeing manatees die. I'm seeing turtles die. There was a whale shark that died. All these things that are just not normal. And so many people were just still denying that this was a problem and turning their heads to it, that I was like, you know what? The news isn't reporting about it. No one else is doing it. I was a journalism major in school. You know what? I'm going out there and I'm doing it. I will bring everybody in. And that's what I did. I literally went out with my iPhone and my camera, and I just started walking the beaches, and I started doing it 2 to 3 times a week, traveling up and down the coast, bringing everyone in live and in the scene so they can't doubt that this is actually happening,
Hmm.
to see what's happening, whether it was a good day or a bad day. They got to see what was happening that day on the water, and get a little bit more information. And also because I wasn't 100% informed, I tried to bring everyone in with me to learn more as I learn, so we can all learn together and evolve together and become, activists together. That was my idea behind all this.
I love that, the fact that you took your camera to where it was happening. It wasn't a discussion of possibilities or, possibly this or that. And I think that's a really important aspect that we have now in social media that's incredible, is us activists have access to bring our cameras to where we are, which is why I'm very excited about having you on here today, because that was kind of the original idea of the conservation conversation, was to see if we could get cameras out in the field to show us in reality what's happening. And it's interesting because
Yeah.
where you are, if we see fish, we understand there's something happening, but what may be even more dangerous is if we don't, and we assume there's nothing happening while we're being poisoned.
Hmm.
When you first heard that you were going to have to go back out, or when you first decided to go back to the beach, what what kind of emotions did you feel when you knew it was coming back?
I was pretty sad. I mean, I was really hoping to meet. I mean, this is the time of year we're going to see a natural red tide event happen here in Florida. So, it was bound to probably happen just because the water table is still very broken. There's a lot of issues going on
Hmm.
and things with the water system itself. So, I was expecting it to happen. I'm just hoping that it doesn't turn into something like we have seen in the past, and that this will be just your normal everyday red tide. They usually, I mean, some studies I've read, NOAA just came out with a big study, and I'll go off of that, is that it starts anywhere between 10 and 40 miles off of shore. It's usually comes from nitrates that are in the water, upwelling that brings a lot of mineral rich water and sediment up into the surface, allows the algae to start to bloom. We also have Saharan dust that comes in the atmosphere from Africa. And when it rains, it deposits the dust here into the Gulf, and it will actually trigger a non-harmful cyanobacteria bloom called trichodesmium, or a lot of people know it as sea sawdust because it looks like sawdust on the water. That brings a lot of nitrogen to the red tide, and that's what can trigger a naturally occurring bloom to happen. And then what happens is the currents and the wind can make it move around, and eventually it can be pushed into shore, which we're experiencing here in Naples. And whether or not it lingers is how much nutrients it's getting from the estuaries, from the runoff, everything like that. And then also, how the wind and everything is working. Right now, the wind's been in our favor. It's been blowing offshore all week, so we're not seeing the worst of what it could be like right now in Naples. The wind's supposed to shift, I think, on Tuesday, so we can end up seeing on Tuesday, if this is still lingering off the coast at that point, death lining our beaches again. That's always a possibility. So,
wow, that's, I mean,
but
now, when you talk about that too, let's talk a little bit about, I think it's interesting because you're always an activist for the Florida coast, but I know that the interest of what you do comes and goes based on people's association with red tide, or when they hear it, they get a little concerned maybe about themselves. And again, I think that maybe, they come in, they look at red tide for 2 months and go, yeah, it's naturally occurring and blah, blah, blah. Or, at 18 months, I guess, as last year was, a little bit over that. So, it's not what people have to say, about it. So I think what my question would be is, I can hear kids. I hope they're not going in the water. Are they? Are these families going in the water? Would you show?
Oh,
why don't
yeah,
you show
I'm
us what's
surrounded
happening
by
over
people.
there? Actually,
Yeah.
that's more interesting than anything I have to ask. So,
let me see if I can flip the camera.
okay,
I think I
sounds
just
good.
took a picture instead of
There we go.
flipping.
That's good. That's like the
Hold
video
on.
where the
Can I-
dad takes his selfies instead of any of the movies. There we go.
Yeah. Well, here, let me see if I can flip it
Okay,
around.
thanks.
You can see it that way.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what's
So-
going on there. I mean, and
so-
this is, again, this is the danger, is that these guys are poisoning the waters, and while nobody's talking about it, it secretly gets worse and worse until it explodes into this. So how does it look today?
Yes. The water clarity itself looks okay. It has a little bit of a greener hue than normal to it, but it's clear. It doesn't look uninviting. The air itself has a pretty peppery smell to it, or not smell, but a scent to it. That is the actual toxins in the air that's like itching. You're hearing me clear my throat or cough here and there. That's from the air itself here. And it tickles your throat. It can make a runny nose, burning eyes, breathing issues, and things like that. And each person's different with the way that they react to it. So if you are actually, believe it or not, more susceptible to things like poison ivy and stuff, you actually can have more of a reaction to this, because this is a plant life, a plant-based organism. So you could very well have a similar reaction, or more bigger reaction than say someone else who doesn't. So. But you could see, I don't know, can you guys see in here? Because I have my camera flipped around, so I can't see what you're seeing. But
I'm trying to zoom it in a little bit.
That's families and people. There are probably,
Look at that.
on this side of the pier, probably about 3 dozen people in the water, kids, families, things like that. There's red tide signs posted, but nothing that says, swim at your own risk. But if you're not, last year, I'm going to these beaches where the water was literally black. There's actually some dolphins out here too. But the water was black, and there were dead fish floating everywhere, and families were in the water. Now, we have to remember too, a lot of this is not necessarily locals. These could be a lot of tourists who are receiving a lot of misinformation, who don't know any better. They're not seeing the fish floating above them, and they very well may not be seeing them at their feet. So, it's unfortunate that a lot of times it's language barriers and just, it's lack of awareness. That's really what it comes down to.
And it's a difficult thing, because Florida is one of the world's biggest destinations, between Disney World, Disneyland.
And I got the seagulls next to me.
Oh, see, beautiful. I mean, it looks gorgeous. And I think this is part of the problem, is that, it looks wonderful. I would love to go out there and do some snorkeling.
It looks inviting, so you wouldn't know any better. That's the whole thing. And that's the sad situation, is that, a lot of people mistaking clarity and quality as the same thing, and it's not. And that's one thing you have to remember. The water could look great, but, things may not be so good in the water.
And it's scary to see the children in there, because children are more susceptible, just like the elderly, to infections. And and it is scary, because technically they've warned them about red tide, but they haven't told them the whole truth. So these parents are making an uninformed decision. I bet if they knew what you knew, they would not have their children in the water.
Oh no, there's a lot of times I've already spoken to a few people since I got here before I came on with you about the water because they were asking me why I was taking pictures, and so I explained to them. And a lot of people I educate when I'm out on my morning beach walks, looking at the conditions and everything. You know, they just don't know any better because it's just lack of information. We don't have a good enough education system about red tide happening in Florida to let residents know what really is happening here. And, you know, we're just told and fed the information that it's naturally occurring. This is normal. Don't worry about it. Come on down. Don't mind the coughing, you know?
Right. And, and that's actually a great point. We will put some links on after the podcast today so everybody can come
Oh,
back and
sure.
find fantastic ways to get local information because the national news and even I think the larger groups that are involved are going to still have a lot of politics. But one thing that's amazing about Florida is all the activists come together and they all share all of their information for free all the time. Most people that are
Mm-hmm.
activists down there that I've talked to don't do it full time. It's just out of the passion and out of the importance. I mean, you're down there warning people about what's happening. Do you find that they believe you, or do they disbelieve? Or?
Um, People who are aware of what we went through or saw what we went through, you know, over last year during 2017, I think that they are more susceptible to the information than those who aren't familiar with it because they just don't understand, you know, or couldn't imagine that you know it would be okay. You know, is it safe? Like, why would they? They wouldn't. If it was bad, they wouldn't let us here. And it's like, well, unfortunately, not a single beach got closed last year unless it was because of a high fecal count, not because there were dead things washing up on the beach and the water was black. So,
That's even, yeah. And that's a whole other aspect we haven't even talked about is all the waste as
no, the
well.
sewage is a huge issue. That's a big factor with these algae blooms too. Is the amount of sewage issues that we have down here. So we have a broken infrastructure in Florida. So
And that's, it's here. Can you mind flipping it back around? I miss seeing you on camera here. There you are. Okay, good, good. I feel better now talking to you that way. Um, so and it really is. It's crazy. I mean, if we have this moment right now, if you could just tell potential tourists or people that are coming here one thing, if you just one thing you wanted to warn them or tell them about, what would you say?
if you see a sign that says that there's a red tide bloom present, take the time to go on your phone and you don't have to save it. Just go FWC red tide and look at the most recent sample map. That will be the first search thing that comes up when you Google it. It will give you the most current readings that we have. And also, NOAA is another good forecasting system where they don't necessarily forecast, but they can kind of predict between the winds and what the bloom contents are as to what to expect throughout the following week or, you know, a few days ahead of it. So, be informed. You know, you're not going to hear it from the officials here necessarily, or at least not as of right now. So be informed and go and find out these warnings for yourself. Check FWC and NOAA. They both have great red tide maps and monitoring systems that you can follow. They test, I think it's every other day here right now, especially when there's a bloom present. To keep the test sampling reports updated. And FWC does test along the beaches. So then, you know, you'll be able to see exactly when you click on the dots that are colored, it'll tell you what beach it is, what the content level is, and what the level is. So you can kind of get an idea then, you know, and know for yourself. And if it's a high concentration, don't go to the water. If it's a medium, I probably wouldn't even go. To be honest with you, I personally haven't gone swimming. I think I've only gone swimming once since 2017, twice since 2017. So
Wow. So
unfortunately, I just
that's
don't trust the water quality. But
And that's what I was going to say. With these maps, people that are visiting, do need to know that there are areas that are still okay to go swimming in, but to make sure to
oh
check the
wow, oh
information
yeah,
first, because you cannot rely on the signs or anything like that.
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, definitely go on the maps because it'll give you, you know, right now Marco Island is showing pretty clear. There are some fish kills though happening in the canals there. So I would be a little cautious of it. This is why you should follow the groups online too, because you get real time pictures from a lot of people who live in these areas showing you what's happening as well. But anywhere north of Fort Myers right now is clear of red tide. I think it's as high as it's just now hitting Sanibel. but that was at very low concentration. So, yeah, so it is spreading north slowly, but hopefully it won't get past that. We shall see. They started doing discharges from Lake Okeechobee yesterday. That has the potential to bring additional nutrients downriver into the Gulf and everything, but they're not doing a high volume of discharges. So let's hope that's not the case.
And so, yeah, for people that are just sort of tuning in or aren't 100% knowledgeable about that, can you just explain real quickly how that discharge would affect what we're seeing with red tide or on the coast?
Well, with Lake Okeechobee, I believe you did a brief description about it a little bit at the beginning of the show. Lake Okeechobee is a large lake, freshwater lake that's in the center of the state. Unfortunately, over century now that humans have been down here, we have completely manipulated the watershed to our liking to protect certain areas around the lake from flooding, and also special interests with agriculture and things. That lake is highly polluted because it gets all the nutrients that come down from the Kissimmee River Basin and come all the way down to Lake Okeechobee. And so it's full of nutrients and it's full of blue-green algae, which is a harmful cyanobacteria. When they do these releases, it also releases that high polluted water with all those nutrient pollution. And then it also is releasing that algae into the river going to the East Coast as well as to the West Coast. But here in the West Coast, when it comes down here and we have an active red tide event happening, those extra nutrients from that polluted water can potentially feed it, as well as with the cyanobacteria. When that hits salt water, cellular level, it breaks down, and the red tide will then feed off of those nutrients as well. So it'll help exacerbate the bloom or keep a persistent bloom fed and fueled. So
it's like it just feeds itself,
and that's highly toxic. Yeah.
Wow.
And when you were talking about like the neurological aspect of things with algae, that's the algae that causes a lot of the BMAA is known to cause a neurological issues where ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and a recent study came out showing dolphins that were exposed to the blue-green algae actually died with Alzheimer's-like symptoms, and they were showing signs of the similar decay in their brain as an Alzheimer's patient would. And so that's from the blue-green algae. So if it's happening to them, it's happening to us.
And now they're starting to, now with that new knowledge, I bet in about 20 years they'll be able to gather enough data to be able to fully...
I just saw a story. I haven't been able to read it. I bookmarked it, but there's a story that just came out that the CDC is going to start air now too. So that's good news that we're going to have a little bit more information and more research done into the health impacts and how far the toxic air is traveling and things like that. So I haven't gone in depth with the article itself, but I did see something come across earlier before I left about the CDC is going to be setting up testing down here. So that's a good thing. So we'll get some answers at least with the pathogens that are in the air and stuff.
That'd be a nice change. I know that there's been a lot of people doubting that the air can have an issue. But I think that, you guys must run into that a lot because, again, it comes back to invisible aspects that are creating tangible problems. And sometimes it's hard for people to connect them all. Now, I know there's a new documentary, Troubled Waters, that is sort of tackling a lot of Florida's water is under attack. And I wanted to show the trailer to everybody once we're done talking. But awesome. I was wondering if maybe you could kind of, let us know a little bit about that. And
it is a documentary that was done by Calusa Waterkeeper, Casey Schulberg and Kat Chase. Both have produced and filmed and brought this great documentary together where they brought in experts from around the world, as well as right here in Florida, that had been studying BMAAs and toxins from harmful algae. They brought them together to sit down in this documentary and talk about the health issues that are presenting Floridians and the reality that it's not being taken as seriously as we should. And they've specifically made this to push the medical community to start acknowledging this as the potential health crisis that this can become with the long-term exposure that we're facing. We don't know. We have no idea that from 10 years from now, after people being, exposed to high levels of BMAAs last summer, we don't know in 10 years or 20 years from now if all of a sudden we're going to have a large group of people that are diagnosed with some sort of neurodegenerative disease. And so it's good to know and get people here and aware of these health issues, because it's something that has never been discussed or taken seriously enough here in Florida when it comes to the blue-green algae. It's killing dogs. And we're seeing this all over the country now. It's not just specific here to Florida anymore. And that's the thing. And I think that's why also it's going to be taken a little bit more seriously, is that we're seeing these outbreaks happen all over the country, all over the world. A lot of it's associated to climate change and rising temperatures and things, but it's going to be something that we're going to persistently see more and more as climate change happens, and as we don't take enough action to stop what we can stop with nutrient sourcing. So
and that's I like that you really hit on the climate change too, because that's another one of those instances where people want to pretend like what we're doing is not affecting us. And all that does in the end is allow companies to not have any responsibility. I mean, Florida, has the number one cause of death is cancer. And that started in 2011 and is maintained that way. And it can actually be correlated with a lot of these permits that have been given out, and a lot more freedom of these best management practices, where a lot of the towns where there's mining or agriculture or big ag or big sugar have 6 times the cancer rates that the rest of the country does. So I think it's a very important thing, and it's hard to get the health people involved, because once they do and they create that link, they will create, I think, in a lot of ways, a legal link, which people are trying to avoid. And it's the same thing with climate change, but we can't defend these companies. We should be defending our future generations and our families. And so I think it's a really important thing that you bring up, because it's the same disconnect. We need to realize that we do affect our surroundings. And the good thing about realizing that and accepting that responsibility is that we now understand that we can actually stop these things from happening. If they're saying red tide's just a natural thing, well then, Mosaic can keep dumping their stuff, and Big Sugar can keep dumping all their stuff, and fertilizer, and it's natural. There's nothing we can do. So there's a sort of washing their hands. And
absolutely,
I love that you guys are not letting them get away with that. You guys have said no. This is ridiculous, and so it's super important.
And you're starting to see some things happen. There's been a lot of talk about how they can, the Department of Agriculture here in Florida has been really looking into best management practices and what can be done to make them stricter, and start to be a little bit more sustainable in regards to the environment. So they are acknowledging that this is a problem. Whether or not it's end up becoming new regulation, we shall see. But at least they're talking about it. It's better than what we had 2 years ago. So, that's the way we got to look at it. It's just very slow moving in Florida, and that's the way it's going to be. And we need to stop waiting, though, for legislation and start taking the action where we can take action. Stop your communities from fertilizing. Stop using herbicides. Stop that stuff, because it's all feeding these algae blooms.
So there we have it, everybody. It's a lot to think about. There is a lot of aspects you can do on a personal level, from how you keep your yard up to what you purchase. And, and Colleen, thank you for being in the trenches. Thank you for going out there and getting respiratory issues, because you're walking around, you're taking photos of these things. And what I love is that you're not going to be stopped by anything. You're going to bring the truth out and help people make decisions with knowledgeable decisions. And thank you too for being back on the show, because you were on once before
thank
with
you for
us.
having me.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I would love to have you on more and more now, if you don't mind. It would be great to maintain, and let's keep up on what's happening with this red tide, because what happens there not only affects all the citizens there, but is a perfect example and affects everybody around the world and the country.
Yes, absolutely. And if anyone wants to see what's happening here, you're more than welcome to give me a follow on Facebook. I'm sure you'll tag me in this,
Yeah.
and you can see. I do all my videos and updates about the red tide publicly on my page, so you can see everything and what's happening when I'm coming out and looking at the beaches. I'm going to try to get out sometime tomorrow to kind of observe things, since I'm seeing dead things in the water now. I'm sure in the morning, before the cleanup crews come through, we may have a good amount of dead fish on the beach. So
Now, real fast before we go, I just, it's a question I forgot to ask earlier. The cleanup crews, for
yeah.
those of us that don't live there, what does that mean?
We have people who come down on side by sides and start cleaning up the fish, and they take them and they dispose of them somewhere. Some areas they just throw them in dumpsters and they go to landfills. Other areas they incinerate the dead marine life or bury it. Depending on where you are, it can be city employees. I've also seen in certain areas it is people who are doing community service, and they weren't even supplied masks or gloves when they were doing it last year, which really was bothering to me. And I even down here on Naples Beach, it was the same thing. You don't see them wearing masks and gloves when they were coming through cleaning up the fish. Yeah, it depends. It varies by location. But if it's a public area, they're going to clean the beaches a lot of times. In certain areas, if it's a private beach, especially if the seasonal folks are not here yet, they will leave the fish there. And so you could go and see those private beaches, and it'll have, a week's worth of dead fish on it.
That's really disturbing that they put so much time and money into hiding what's happening instead of addressing the source of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's hiding and it's not, because they should. I mean, it does help keep down, because last year we were experiencing situations where we were getting maggots and things like that on the beach. So I do understand why they do come through and clean it up. It is very shady the way they do it, because they do it early in the mornings before people come out, and then they are patrolling the beaches constantly. I've already had the beach patrol guy go by me, I think 2 or 3 times now, scouring, looking for the dead fish washing up. So, and the back of his truck had a container with dead fish in it. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for being there and bringing us to the problem firsthand. I really, really appreciate everything that you do. I love watching your videos. I watch it. You're the person that brought all the information to me, finding your how you were doing the live videos, doing the pictures.
Thank you.
And it's changed my understanding of how everything runs down there. And
Oh, great. I'm glad that that's my goal. So hopefully, if I can change one person's mind or ask, get one person just to look something up online every day, then my mission is accomplished. So for the day. So thank you for that. And I really appreciate you really bringing this up and helping educate people about this and talking about this.
It's great to, talk and get that knowledge out there. And like I always say, we are our best encyclopedia. We can all share what we have. And together, collectively, we have, so much good info. And definitely, everybody,
absolutely,
make sure to go to Colleen's page, follow her. You will get all kinds of updates. And even when she's not out in the field, you're going to get articles. You're going to get information, and all of it is important to understand, because there's 8,000 puzzle pieces to what's happening there. So
it's one big toxic puzzle.
There you go. And thanks again, Colleen, for being on today.
Thank you, Eric.
Right.
It was good seeing you.
Thanks, you too. We'll see you again soon.
All right, take care.
All right, guys, we're going to go to Troubled Waters.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. So this is the Troubled Waters trailer. I'm just going to shut up and let you guys watch it. right. So we're going to put up information down there so everybody can find out when the screenings are. And if you are in Florida, highly recommend to go to these screenings. So, we got to talk to Colleen a little bit today about what's happening and why the human interference and the human pollution is creating issues in the natural land and the natural water. And our next guest is Kenny Hinkle Jr., Kenny has been a longtime activist, and Kenny is a dad. He is a citizen. He's a guy that saw what was happening around him and decided he didn't want his family to grow up in that environment, and has been very outspoken, created Bull Sugar in order to call out Big Sugar and all of their pollution and nutrients and on their discharge and what they're doing to all the land around them. People think of sugar, they always think of happiness and cupcakes and joy, but Big Sugar itself is a massive, massive issue. And, before we bring Kenny on, I wanted to, first of all,
Kenny will be followed by Andy Spears. Andy?
My name's Kenny Hinkle. I'm president of bullsugar.org. The summer of horrors is upon us. It's ungodly, it smells, it stinks, and it reeks of U.S. sugar and Florida crystals. When I went out to the marina yesterday with Marjorie and others that were out there, the smell hit you so hard, made you so sick to your stomach, it was all I could do to keep from vomiting. Kind of like when I walked in here this morning and saw two of our state representatives that hijacked Amendment 1 money and have the audacity to come in here and parade in front of us like they care.
I love you.
I got sick. Well, the summer's just going to get worse. And we're going to have the dead animals. We're going to have the dead dolphin, the dead manatee, the dead sea turtles. We're going to have sick kids. It's the worst case.
All right, so everything has a tipping point. And I used to love fishing. I haven't been able to go because my environment's ruined over here in Stewart. But I went on July 28th, and I was going offshore with my cousin. We had to go 13 miles out the St. Lucie Inlet to get out of black water that was coming from Lake Okeechobee. 13 miles. And I'm like, all right, I got to learn about this. And then we had an emergency RAC meeting, which was South Florida Water Management District. And I went to that, and all I saw was everybody on their phones and nobody giving a crap about what was happening. That was my tipping point. That's when I got angry. And I was like, all right, I got to do something about this. Then we had 7,000 people at the St. Lucie locks, where the C-44 comes down and dumps into the St. Lucie River, kind of like you have the C-43 on the other coast going into the Caloosahatchee. And
yeah,
I was just mad. I'm like, all right, something has to change. We have to affect change.
that's just it's unfathomable, I think, to a lot of people that you could see nature that you knew and that you loved so much change that drastically. Now when you looked at it, that's a massive battle. You looked at a huge amount of pollution and said we're going to make a change. So what was your what was your first step, and how did you go about fighting everybody?
So basically, it took up learning. I had to educate myself. I didn't know about the issue. Even though I lived here, I didn't know about it enough. And so I was brought in by Carl Wickstrom, one of my mentors. Maggie Hercella, who is Janet Reno's sister, is one of my mentors. People that have been at this for a long time. And then I read every science report that we had, and then went to DC and then Tallahassee multiple times. And then
Wow.
Yeah, and then try to deal with the politicians who are all taking money from the big corporations that are poisoning all of us in South Florida, all of us.
That's a huge uphill battle. Did you what kind of resistance have you faced with them? I mean, I'm sure that when you start talking to a lot of the general public, people are really on your side. But what kind of resistance have you found within, these companies? Have they fought back?
They come back after the activists. They come back at them hard. I even started in a political campaign at flyer that I'm not even running for office. I don't intend to. And here I am. They call me the liberal Democrat trying to elect liberal Republicans. And I'm like, no, I crossed the line. Friends are friends. We all have to be friends on this water issue. We have to. Yeah. Florida is water. I mean, that's what we're all about. We're losing our springs. We're losing the East Coast, the West Coast, Everglades. We're losing Florida Bay. I mean, it's a nightmare. Our coral is all dying, and it's us. It's we're doing that. It's not climate change. It's us. Climate change is accelerating it, but it's us. It's all of us, and we have to reduce our pollution. Period.
So that's important because it's a lot of it has a personal responsibility of making sure that we don't continue to add plastics and we don't continue to add these issues in. Now, as far as addressing these major companies, like we were talking about before, there's a few different bad guys out there that are just polluting pretty much legally at free will through Florida. What do you think is one of maybe the biggest threats that we can focus on right now to start to try to advocate and force change?
The biggest threat is called best management practices. It's like giving the keys to the liquor store to the drunk, and don't worry, nobody's looking, but you'll do the right thing. That's what we have with agriculture right now, all throughout Florida. There is no regulation. Rick Scott cut out the FDEP and cut out all 600 scientists from South Florida Water Management District. We're trying to get them back now that we have a new commission in there. But I mean, deregulation is not a good thing.
Right.
when it's without protection, it's just not a good thing. It doesn't make any sense. So we're trying to fight to get that back. And basically we just educate with science and facts. That's our weapons of war: science and facts. We don't need anything else besides that. Eventually, somebody will start to realize what's happening, and eventually, it's going to come to their backyard, and hopefully, that they will speak out to their friends and share the knowledge.
And that's really it's an important sword that you're talking about swinging, I think, because once you are able to get this information out, I mean, imagine that you as an activist and a couple groups of activists have been able to really combat these gigantic corporations just armed with the truth. Because once people understand what's really happening out there, they really start to consider it. So I think it's really amazing the way that you're approaching it, because really it is a David Goliath kind of story. And I mean, when you talk about best management practices, one of the things I was shocked to learn about is Mosaic. They discharge all these heavy metals, they discharge uranium, they discharge all these crazy chemicals, and they have to test themselves once a year just for the pH level. So,
right. Right. So yeah, here's the keys to the liquor store. You have to put it in layman's terms. Here's the keys to the liquor store. You're not going to drink though, I know, but here's the keys.
See, there you go. And
it doesn't work. It doesn't work, man. It's not working. And so we have to change that. Fundamentally, we have to reach inside of ourselves and find a way through the ballot box, through social media, to spread truth. And that's how we fight the big corporations.
Now, with the elections coming up, we have this amazing opportunity. I always say we're the reason that we have the problem, but we're also the cure. And, so now how would you recommend, or how do you view this upcoming election, and how can people sort of find the best ways to make sure they're voting for the environment, they're voting for clean water, that they're not being fooled?
All right, you caught me off guard, but there is a website you can go to and find out everybody's environmental record. And honestly, I'll endorse Republicans and Democrats
Yeah.
if they're on the right side of trying to save our environment. And so that's how you approach it. We got to get out the vote. We got to get more people out the vote. And that's trying to be suppressed as well. So I don't even want to get into it, but so we've got to get people to vote. We got to educate and check and follow up and see who's doing what and when. The best thing we did was a year ago. We took River Kids to D.C. We got to meet with Senator Rubio, Senator Nelson, Brian Mast helped bring them up. The River Kids are over here protecting the water, and so we brought the kids up there. And normally when I go to Tallahassee or D.C., they don't listen to me. They could give two craps because I'm not there filling their coffers with donations. But when you bring the kids and the kids tell their story of the lost summer and the dead fish, and somebody lost their dog because it drank blue-green algae and died within a day from liver disease, I mean, that is more powerful than anything I can say or do.
There you go. That's the best way, just to bring that truth of what everyone's living through. I was surprised when I was down there that most people that live on the water or near the water are very conscious of what's happening around them. And then there seems to be this kind of wall that was put up when they deregulated all the industries. They built another wall of information, and so I think it's amazing that you were able to get those kids over that wall, get the information out. And that's one really important thing, is to affect change on a bigger level. That's something that I remember with your organization was vote water, water. And I think that's an important key.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, water is life. I mean, it really is. So to have been part of the Indian River Keeper organization and the Rivers Coalition has been integral for me to keep pushing forward. And there's in Bull Sugar, of course, bullsugar.org. I co-founded. We built up a resistance, literally with social media. Like everybody was like, "Yeah, this is BS. We need something better. We have to work on it." And so we came up with the name Bull Sugar, and we stuck with it. So it's kind of we're on the edge a little bit.
I was gonna say, I like the name. It's very memorable, and it tells you exactly what is happening.
Yeah, well, being a North Carolina guy for a long time, Bull Sugar is like the one phrase that was like we always used instead of saying the bad word. So it just fit perfectly with the sugar corporations. We have two billionaire corporations out there, U.S. Sugar and Florida Crystals, that are blocking every effort to bring water south to the Everglades where it's needed, and to Florida Bay. Florida Bay is dying from hypersalinity. Meanwhile, my community, Stewart, is getting dumped on from Lake Okeechobee, and Fort Myers is getting dumped on from Lake Okeechobee. The water needs to go south. It's got to flow and settle and then go out to Florida Bay.
And from what I understand, that's the natural flow of it.
That was the natural flow until we dammed it up. But I mean, we don't have to have all of it back. They've got 1 million acres out there. We don't need all of it back. 46,000 would be nice to get some water flowing through and channeling down south. But they block everything. They pay every politician, Democrats and Republicans. They don't care. They buy them all because they can.
Mm-hmm. The Everglades, I've been reading a lot about where there's been people trying to come in to do some oil drilling, people trying to come in to bottle water, people trying to bring all these in. It's a very, one of the most diverse and important areas in there. Can you also kind of help us understand how how these, what they're trying to, why they don't want to, to reopen it, because it would be a natural way for all the water to filter itself out and get back to the natural way of things.
Well, it's profit. We subsidize the sugar industry. Our tax dollars, we pay twice the amount for sugar, which is, to me, poison, cancer, diabetes, all these fun things that come with it. And it's not food. They're not growing food. They try to make it like they are. And then, all right, so the other aspect to your question is the biggest, scariest thing to me is with Mosaic and others they're talking about doing deep water injection, which goes into our aquifer where we draw all our water from. And we have a limestone aquifer, which is very porous. I mean, the most porous rock you could possibly have is our bedrock. So everything's going to seep into everything. There's no way to control it once you start sending it down. And so we keep sending poisons flowing, and we keep sending, and now they're talking deep water injection. I mean, can you imagine?
And that's one of the worst. I mean, that's one of the worst things, because then it's really out of sight, out of mind, like we were talking to Colleen about, and then everybody forgets until it manifests again, and it's
right.
A very dangerous way of them invisibly poisoning everybody.
Right. Yeah, and it's just not a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. You're going to inject it into limestone so that it gets spread everywhere, and there's zero control.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Three things I want. I want one, point source pollution control, where we stop it at the source. And then two, we're going to have to demuck, because all the sediment that's loaded with phosphorus and nitrogen has got to come up, and we got to figure out what to do with it. I don't know where we can put it, because it's total pollution. It's a super fuel for algae and red tide. So we got to put that somewhere. And then three, we got to restore our seagrasses east and west and get the oyster beds back and alive. So those are the three ways but it's got to start with point source. If we don't have point source, we can demuck all we want. We can replant oysters all we want. And I've been out there and I've done all that. But if we don't stop the pollution from coming in, it doesn't matter. And that's the saddest part.
And that's a really great point, because whether it's recycling or a lot of these other things, a lot of times companies will absolve themselves of any responsibility and leave it with us, the citizens, as like a downstream solution. So I really like what you're talking about. I think it's really important that I think that we have that effect. Because that's going to be the only way, is to stop them at the source.
We have to stop it at the source. If they can have their own water drainage field, they're going to have to put it on their farms. They're going to have to put it in Orlando. Orlando's got to clean up their act too. I mean, big time, because everything goes south from there. They're the beginning of the Everglades chain, the Kissimmee River, and everything comes downstream. And so if they're going to have to clean up their stuff too, Disney is really going to have to clean their stuff up. They're probably going to come after me now, but I said that. But
they probably already don't like me as is, so I'm sure we're good.
I got a sign up sheet, so yeah.
Hey, if you're making enemies while you're trying to save the environment, you're doing the right thing.
You're doing something right. You're doing something right. Yeah.
And it's an all. I know. I mean, because it's an all-around battle down in Florida. There's a lot of passionate activists. There's a lot of separate groups working. Now, you've had a lot of experience. I mean, you are really one of the long-term, activists that has brought visibility through social media, which I think is one of the most important things that we have, because we can connect all of each other together. And as we were talking about, we are our own encyclopedia. We don't need them to bring us around and try to give us their talking points anymore. We can share. Peter Tosh actually said that,
we changed the narrative. We changed the narrative.
That's it.
They owned it. They controlled it. Mm-hmm. Social media, we're able to change the narrative and tell truth with science and scientists and facts and hydrogen. I mean, engineers, and I mean, we have changed it. We've changed the mode, and the narrative is really important, because they don't get to control it anymore, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to react.
Yeah, I'm sure they got to be scrambling because they've been able to, give people just a certain amount of information. I mean, I was surprised also, like in Florida, people didn't know about gypsum stacks. That even some of the people that live down there, they didn't think twice about it because they had done such an amazing job. And they put a lot of money into PR, all these different companies and organizations. But again, you, with the sword of truth and being able to communicate with everybody, has brought them down. They're worried about you. So it's amazing the power that we can have when we connect. And I think that's correct. That's what's been amazing about your approach to it. Like I was going to say, Peter Tosh, a lot of his albums were banned in Jamaica. And they said, well, what do you think about that? He said, well, it doesn't matter because information is transmitted from people to people and you can't ban that. And that's what you've been able to do, is to bring everybody in all on the same page and start to think about how to change things for the future. And now what I wanted to ask is, with all your experience, and I know that there's a lot of, it's difficult just to even run a cause in general, whether it's through activists or through companies or enforcements or whatever. But to you, what's the biggest obstacle to the next step?
All right. So the biggest obstacle is getting activists together and on the same page is like herding cats. But they're but they're Helen Keller's cats. They're blind, deaf, and dumb, and you got to just keep trying to guide them in the right direction as politely as you can.
That's it.
That's all you can do. So that's the first hurdle, and trying to keep everybody on the same page and with the same message. Because if you have too many messages, nobody's listening. So trying to get the same message that. So when I fight for my community, I fight for all communities in Florida. I make sure that we want water to go to the Everglades, that I'll fight for Fort Myers, that I'll fight for Naples and their water not being polluted over there as well. And I don't have that NIMBY, not in my backyard thing going on.
That's good because, it's all connected.
Yeah. So if we just said, all right, Stewart doesn't get any more water and just dump it on Fort Myers and don't send anything to the Everglades in Florida Bay, no, that's wrong. There's nothing right about that. There's nothing right about that. So that's one of the biggest ones too. Like we have a lot of NIMBY ideas over here, and I try to reject that every time because it's about all of us. We're all connected. It's Florida, and so we got to do everything. And like you said, they're stealing all the spring water now and bottling it. I mean, the fracking of the Everglades, the offshore drilling. There's so many things. It's hard to keep up with all it. And you just try to do your best. But I know that if we get water flowing south to the Everglades, it'd be a good thing for Florida Bay. It'd be a good thing for Fort Myers. It'd be a good thing for Stewart.
So now where can people go to learn more about that or help sign any petitions or help just try to help anybody that wants to get involved?
riverscoalition.org. Okay. I'm on the board of directors, Rivers Coalition. Indian River Keep, any of the water keepers, the Waterkeeper Florida Alliance is great. We have water keepers all around Florida. We have, I think there's 7 or 8 of them that are really making a difference. And the St. John's one, and there's Biscayne Bay, and there's Caloosahatchee Waterkeeper. John's doing phenomenal over there. There's people all around Florida that are, and around the country actually. The Waterkeeper Association. I mean, that's a great way to get involved. Trying to think. And follow Bull Sugar. I mean, they throw the truth out there. bullsugar.org. And they're not scared of it.
Good. Okay. Yeah. No, and you know what? We'll put all those links too, so that everybody can make sure to have access, especially the environmental kind of background checking on the politicians. Bull Sugar, the Rivers Coalition. And, again, this is why Florida to me is amazing, because it is a hope spot. There's so much going on, but there's so much fighting back. And it really makes a big difference. I mean, even here in Los Angeles, we have a lot of issues, but there's nothing in the same equivalent passion, I don't think, as what I see in Florida and what you guys are doing. And again, what I see in Florida too is that all the activists have to really put up with a lot from the companies. There's a lot of character assassination going on. There's a lot, so I'm curious for you. I know that you have had a lot that you've had to deal with to get results. Why, for you, is it important to deal with all that and put up with all that to try to make a change?
Well, at the end of the day, I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she's going to have a future. I'm 51. Maybe I got another 20, 30 years. She's 17, and she's born and raised here. And at the end of the day, I want her to know that her dad did what was right.
Love that.
For her.
That's the most important. That's what I found is that what's so amazing is because everybody's jumping in for love of the kids or the grandkids or the next generation. And, you guys have an amazing ability to see in the future, think in the future like that, where a lot of places are still thinking in the past or in the present. And we saw it like in Flint, for example, where suddenly everybody said, "Oh, what's going on with the future? What about the kids?" And so I think it's really amazing and very powerful and inspirational that you guys do it for that reason.
Well, and I also think that this younger generation is really doing things. They're doing amazing things. They're fighting against all kinds of different issues, and then I get to see the decimation and bashing kids because they're speaking out about something. And it's unbelievable to me. Like adults would do that. Yeah. But you know what I mean?
Oh no, it's been insane. I mean, I couldn't even believe the behavior we saw, with again, people just trying to maintain this disconnect between company pollution and environment that we live in, and it's sad because a lot of it is just sort of talking points that people are adopting without thinking too heavily about it. And it was I was very ashamed to see that division, even within conservationists and environmentalists.
And they're even popping up with fake environmental groups all over social media now too. They'll call them different names. I'm not going to name them.
Right. But no, that's a good point. Is how
AstroTurf environmental groups.
There you go. And there
fake
are
greens you can get.
They're there to kind of throw everybody off guard. When you find those, what's kind of one of the indicators that you see sometimes that maybe alerts you to that? Might be.
I always watch to see how they support agricultural, big companies and stuff like that. That's one of the things you can look at. They'll put a nice picture of a manatee up and then talk about how we want to destroy all the communities around Lake Okeechobee, and no, we don't. Actually, I'm hoping we can get more manufacturing out there and jobs for them because nobody works anymore out there. It's 40% unemployment rate south of the lake.
Wow.
Because of mechanization for sugar. All the people that lived out there were mostly Jamaican people, don't have jobs, and it's brutal. It's brutal. I mean, I can't imagine. Unless you see it, you drive through it, and you see them. And they don't have any opportunity. And there's no opportunity out there. So
crazy because the sugar would say, "Hey, we're the big job source down here."
Yeah, no. Just take one drive through. Mm-hmm. I mean, we got to do something to help those people, and there's no way out except through sports or drugs. For a bunch of the young men. Either they can make it in the NFL. I mean, if you look at some of the NFL players from Pokey and Belglade, I mean, and it's either that, they focused on that, or they focused on selling drugs. And that's the only way out. It disheartens me. It makes me so sad that, so maybe creating some kind of jobs out there with a manufacturing plan or something along those lines would help. And getting rid of sugar would help.
Yeah. Well, they sound like, that's the crazy thing is people think about it. We were talking about earlier, everybody says, you think about cupcakes and you think about, treats at Christmas time or something, but you don't realize that there is a human toll, both physically, for the workers that were left,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
were abandoned, and plus physically for everyone that has to live around it with the pollution and and then you've got again, it's leading back to the highest,
Well,
cancer taking
yeah.
over in 2011 as the number one cause of
Yeah.
death in Florida, as these best management practices reach their peak. And Rhonda said something interesting. She said we need to begin with personal accountability, and I love that idea. And I think that that personal accountability, we need to make sure starts with these companies.
We do. And that's why I was saying point source. It's the same idea.
Yes.
Personal accountability, point source. I mean, I equate it to your neighbor changed 6 different cars oil and dumped it right in your backyard over your fence.
There you go. That's a great way to see it, actually. Yeah.
I try to equate it to that when I try to explain it in simpler terms. Imagine 6 cars load of oil is all over your backyard and you had nothing to do with it. It's meanwhile, you're cleaning everything and taking care of everything and growing a nice garden, a natural garden in your backyard. But no, now it's all dead because the oil's everywhere. That's what it's like.
Wow, that's actually that's a very good way to see it, I think.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Ed.
And you're right. It's important to find, because it's such a huge concept. I mean, you've got, between sugar and the fertilizer and your cattle industry and your mining, and it's almost like it's intentionally baffling so that people are overwhelmed and kind of give up a little bit. Like we had talked about the shock doctrine, where they will just overwhelm people with negativity so that they just walk away, basically. And and so I think it's important with Florida because there are so many issues that it's important to narrow them down. And I love the idea of point source. There's personal responsibility of these companies, and that's what's missing. The politics that were supposed to be there to overlook them were replaced with probably payoffs or definitely situations where everyone's looking the other direction.
Well, it really surprises me that so when we go to Tallahassee, the fishing industry is $80 billion a year in Florida.
Wow.
$80 billion. That's a powerful organization. And they're starting to speak up. We have Captains for Clean Water on our West Coast. We have other organizations going on over here. But Carl Wickstrom, who started Florida Sportsman magazine last year, was one of my best buddies. He told me it's about the environment, stupid.
There you go. It doesn't get much simpler than that, right? That is truth.
That's a simple fix. It is. I mean, it pays for. I mean, there's so much money to be made by the fishing industry, and so we're trying to equate the money to that, and show the politicians like, hey, $80 billion of Florida income is from fishing, and if it's all dead, there's not going to be any fishing. That's dried up. It's gone.
See, and it's like you said, everything is so interconnected. The tourism is driven into the diving.
Tourism,
the
and that's not even the tourism industry. That's just fishing.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Who wants to come see blue-green algae? Have you ever smelled that before? By the way,
no, I haven't. When I was there,
it's like death on a cracker. All I want to do is vomit when I smell it. I mean, it's like red tide is different. We're having it on the West Coast again now, just a little bit. It's not as bad as it was last year. But red tide, you don't smell, but it hits you. Your sinuses and eyes just start puffing up and watering everywhere. And but blue-green algae, oh my God, man, it's all I can do to keep from puking. And I'm wearing a respirator while I'm doing it. Try not to snarf in that, because that would be gross.
Yeah, exactly. That's the last place you want that to happen.
Right. No, not in the mask. Not in the mask.
And it's crazy to think that in this number one tourist destination in the world, residents are having to wear gas masks and respirators just to sometimes go to the beach, sometimes to walk outside.
Right. It's crazy. Right?
People's
dead
animals
dogs, dead sea turtles, dead manatee, dead dolphin. I mean, it's all washing up. I mean, it's affecting people. And then I think I don't know if I told you earlier, but we had 70 people get tested for microcystin, which is the toxin from blue-green algae that leads to all these neurological diseases. We all did nasal swabs and blood tests. 70 out of 70 that weren't in the water, just near it, tested positive.
Jeez. That's very frightening because
Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's, we're all subject to all this now.
I mean that's really crazy when it started knowing that it was happening in the water, but people that even haven't been in now have these. So
not even in, it's airborne. It's
airborne.
So.
Jeez. And they're not warning people within that limit, right? I mean, they're saying that it goes like a certain distance, but
Martin County's getting better at everything with more testing and stuff like that. But you could smell it from 2 miles away. I mean, it was that bad. So if it smells bad, I think it's a human reaction to get away from it, and it's probably a natural instinct. That if something smells like that, you don't want to be near it.
Unless you're an activist, then you put your mask on and you walk closer to it, right?
Yeah, of course, man. I got to document everything, man. I got to get it on camera and take the pictures and tell people about it and take water samples and send it. I was with Congressman Patrick Murphy when he filled up bottles for for a half hour of the crap. So he could take it to Congress and let people have one and smell it, and how bad it was. And that probably was. I asked if I could mail it, and then they told me it might be a terrorist act.
Wow, that's telling right there, huh? They're like, you can't mail those chemicals.
I asked my postmaster, can I mail blue-green algae to a senator? And they're like, that could be considered a terrorist act. Well, why isn't it when they're dumping it on me? Right. Why isn't it called a terrorist act when they're dumping it on me?
That's actually that really that's a crazy twist, and
right.
Just imagine that guys. I'm sure everybody just heard that, but the idea of mailing blue-green algae would be considered a terrorist act. And that's insane because they are acknowledging that this stuff is super dangerous unless it has in contact with residents or citizens. And that is just, and I think that, with you bringing all this information out through social media, people are now more aware. And I think politicians definitely have a lot more to answer to now. So, I think this is going to be a very interesting election coming up and more writing than ever before. Like you said, the kids are way more knowledgeable today.
They are.
My friends' kids were just out protesting last week. So it was amazing to see.
They got to vote. That's you can change everything through voting. I'm just a bartender. I'm a video photographer. But if I can get more people to vote, I know I can affect change. And, I had an 18-year-old kid came into the bar. Well, why can't I drink? I say, because you don't vote.
Yeah, there you go.
If you voted, if you all voted, you could change that law tomorrow. But no, you guys don't vote, so it's 21.
And I love that you bring that up because it's true. People forget we have the power. We're all meant to feel very powerless in all this. The companies are going to do what they're going to do. You always hear people say things are what they are, but they're not. Things are what we allow them to be, and things are what we not allow them to be and what we change them into throughout the course of time. Our laws and our system and everything has been a living body that's changed as we go through it.
Right.
So,
it's a living constitution. It's a living constitution. Yes. It's a living government. But you got to vote. Affect the change you want to see. And you affect it at the ballot box. And you affect it by reaching out to people and letting them know how to change and what to change, so that a lot of people. I mean, it's hard for people to follow like every little politician, like every county commissioner, and know who's on the right side. It's a good thing to have people who do know, friends. It's not what you know; it's who you know. So you always have that person that knows the inside, that works on it, and that person that does this and that person that does that. So that's how you fix things.
Exactly. And it's where all this huge connection, like everybody works a little bit together and knows that we're all part of the same team and the same army moving forward. I always say we're part of the same army fighting for a better future.
That's it. And it's the end of the day.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm good.
Oh no, I was going to say what you said about voting, I think, is so critical. We're going to wrap up in a minute, but you showed me a video earlier that absolutely blew my mind. And it's going to explain to people, I think, also why voting is critical. Because the people that are making decisions about the day-to-day and everyone's safety are the people we're going to watch in this video that you shot, called "Thank You for Not Paying Attention," and it is a board of well, actually, if you want to set it up for us, it'd be even better. I can't wait to show everybody this video because it's.
It was an emergency meeting with the South Florida Water Management District, and I went after I went out offshore and couldn't find clean water for 13 miles. So I went to the meeting about the Lake Okeechobee discharges, and I got there a little late because I bartended the night, and got there about lunchtime. And this lady from I can't remember what organization. Sorry, but she was speaking, and her name was Jane, and she made a joke, and nobody laughed. And I'm looking at this whole table of the South Florida Water Management District, and, commissioners and employees, and not one of them was looking up. So I grabbed my camera, big camera, and walked around behind them all. And got them all on their cell phones and iPads and looking at magazines, and it was unreal to me. It was unreal. So
that's crazy that it's an emergency meeting. It's the people in charge of the health of the water,
emergency
which is the health of the
meeting.
people. Yeah,
emergency meeting, and nobody gives a crap. They're just yeah.
Well, again, it's another one of those moments where I'm glad you were there. You noticed it, you caught it, you brought it to everyone's attention, because this is, I think, really, really the core of why there's this disconnect between everyone knows there's a problem and everyone knows everybody's getting sick, but there's this middle spot that, is like baffling, but it's because these people that are supposed to be looking out for everyone have sold everyone out.
Right.
No. So anyway, before we jump to that video, Kenny, I just wanted to thank you for being on today. It's a real honor to have you on because, water is so important, and what we do, what we've done, and what we can do is critical.
It's the future. Water is life, period. Without it properly managed, we're going to be in really big trouble.
Beautifully, perfectly said. Yeah, and thank you again for all of your activism. Thank you for everything that you've done to educate us. I mean, I've learned a lot by going to your sites and looking at your videos and seeing what's been out there. And, it's very inspirational because you have been called to action, and I like you're tenacious. You're not going to stop.
No. I will be relentless, and I'll get louder. That's my two mottos. And I'm going to make every day better. That's the third one.
I love that.
Relentless, louder, and every day better. All right.
Outstanding, man. Outstanding. And yeah, we're going to put some links down so everybody can connect with Kenny. Keep an eye on what's happening. Keep an eye on the politics. Keep your eye on the pulse of what's going on down there.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
You too.
All right. We're going to watch this video you shot pointing out the problem of what's going on.
Yeah, have fun. It's a good laugher. Get some popcorn.
Here we go.
Entering into the lake from fertilizer and from urban uses like septic tanks and other stormwater. Right now, the water quality goal is being exceeded.
Okay, so you guys can see this video here. This is Kenny picked up his camera, and it's a big camera. It's not like a hidden camera. And no one is paying attention. This video it's tragic and it's hilarious at the same time, because these are the people that are making the decision. These are the people that everybody that votes hopes will have their best interest, and look at what they're doing. Instead of paying attention to somebody that knows what they're talking about water. And the problem is that they're not even ashamed of it. They're just doing it out in the public. It's the way it is. And that's what's amazing about Colleen and Kenny, is they're fighting to make sure that this is no longer just the way that it is.
They can make a difference, but they need to target the state as well as the federal.
I mean, look, he's even walking behind them, and they just don't care. They're like, whatever, we're busy. I'm on my Facebook or whatever. But these guys are, the only thing we know that they're not doing is they're not listening. This video is called Thanks for Not Listening. I'm going to put a link down to Kenny's videos because he makes very, very good videos and they're very informative. And I just think that, here we are, I'm back. Okay. So, again, amazing day today. Amazing to get to talk to Colleen, to get to talk to Kenny, to learn about, once we see the red tide, suddenly the world is paying attention to Florida and what's happening, but it's all being discredited by the idea that it's natural, which as we learned today, it's not. It comes from runoff from multiple companies, multiple polluters. And the problem is that the body of the organization in between the polluters and the residents is allowing it. And I think one of the biggest problems really is that it's all legal. And none of these poisonings are illegal. And we have, just like Flint, we have a situation where people's health is being sold for the profit of a few. And although it seems very difficult in Florida because there are so many elements fighting against the idea of clean water, people have stood up down there, and it's got some of the most amazing activism. Again, I recommend to follow Colleen's pages, follow everything with Kenny. There's the group Mosaic that'll keep you updated on what's happening with Mosaic, and they're actually in a permitting process right now that's amazing to watch because it's somewhat of a circus act and the people are watching it happen, and they're no longer accepting it. And Florida's activists have said, we're not going to take this anymore. So it's really amazing. And the Florida activists are a small number and the corporations are a huge number, and yet they still are bringing these companies down to their knees. They're bringing them to the table. They're making them more accountable, and they're exposing them. For a long time, these companies had PR firms, talking points. There's commercials all over, and people weren't getting the full information. But again, people like Kenny, people like Colleen, people like Molly and Paula are out there making it happen. And we're going to put a bunch of links down so everybody can get really educated. It comes back to the same theme that we've always talked about: re-education and education together. The idea that we are going to share information of what's happening. You have Colleen is on one side and Kenny is on the other side, literally, of Florida, and they're both watching what's happening. There's bodies of water in between that are being poisoned, once again, legally. And so, like that video we just saw of everyone using their cell phones instead of listening, that is just like the issues, the health issues and the cancer issue that has become the #1 killer in Florida. There's also a cancer that has grown throughout the politics, and it has overtaken what should have been a healthy operating organ and rendered it useless. And the people that are paying with real cancer, and they're paying with real side effects. And it's something that can be stopped. And it's something that must be stopped because people are paying the price with their bodies, with their health. And it's legal, but it's not right in any fashion. And again, it's very inspiring to talk to people like Colleen and Kenny. And Molly is on here as well. Molly is an amazing inspiration. Molly will take no for an answer, and she just fights against Mosaic to try to keep the waters as clean as possible. And she's not a new activist. She's just like Kenny and Colleen, been around a long time. I see Joanna's here, who's another clean water activist. There is a lot of people on this today. There's Rhonda. There is a lot of people that are jumping in. And again, I want to make sure we bring it away from politics because it'll just get derailed if we think about that. We have to remember to vote water. We have to remember that the important thing is that we are all sharing one major issue and one problem, and everybody needs to come together. It's the only way that I think there's going to be any sort of change in the future. And these elections are our chance, our opportunity to get out there. So again, Florida, everyone pays attention to the red tide. we, for the first time, see what our pollution and our destruction has done to the world around us. And, you know, if it's hard to think about, remember that we are mammals. So what's happening, these brain diseases in the dolphins are the same thing that can be happening to us through the water, through the BMAs, troubled waters. I can't wait to see it. I haven't seen it yet, but it's incredible. And again, thank you, Florida, for being the hope spot for all of us activists, for all of us that know that this is happening in our town, but we don't know how to fight it. You know, we now know that we have to look at permitting. We have to look at the county commissioners. We have to look at the companies themselves. We have to unify and fight back. And yeah, Molly says Mosaic, and she definitely means it. So it's true. She wants them out of there. You know, nothing really good health-wise can come from the system as it is. And the way of thinking the last 50 years has got us to where we are today. So we know that the thinking has to change. And Kenny, Colleen, Molly, Joanna, everybody that I see on here, Rhonda, everybody is fighting. Carl, everybody, Clean Water Now, everyone is approaching it from every angle possible. And it is truly, truly inspirational. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. Thanks for talking to the Red Tide. We got to really hear from two people that can tell us what's happening in the Florida waters. I'm excited to have Colleen come back, and I'm hoping as things progress, we'll have Kenny come back and talk to us more as well, because I still have 1,000 questions. And again, if you're like me, you have more questions than answers about red tide, about harmful algae blooms, blue-green algae, what is happening in the waters down there, why is it killing the water. We didn't even talk about the fact that the Gulf is the biggest dead zone right now. And there are dead zones all throughout the rivers now. So there's dead zones in the water. There's people getting sick. There's animals getting sick. And all of it comes back to borrow Kenny's thing, point source. Let's go back to what's happening and stop it before it gets into our realm of possibility and our realm of prevention, our realm of cleanup. You know, we shouldn't have to be cleaning up for them. So anyway, I just want to say thank you, everybody. I was excited. Today was an amazing day to get to talk to two activists that really, really have inspired me. I'm excited for everybody to come back, join us next week. And we had talked about the plastic challenge. This episode was just too big to kind of do that today. But please go check out the YouTube channel. This video will be on there for you to continue to watch. Or if you missed any of it, you can watch it on YouTube. You can watch it on iTunes. And then as well on YouTube, we will be posting the plastic challenge. We have a challenge. We'll have some videos and some rewards at the end and some giveaways. So thanks, everybody. It was great to see you here today.